All right, so kicking off our next session, our first speaker will be Mahimna Kelkar, presenting work that he did during his PhD at Cornell.
Awesome, thank you. So I just graduated with my PhD from Cornell. I'll be starting as a, thank you. Did not expect applause for that, but thank you. And I'll be starting as a faculty at Purdue next year. And this is kind of my awesome. Well, I expect this round of applause for every slide now. So, all right. Anyways, today I'm very excited to talk about some recent work on the incentives of accountable cryptography. And this is joint work with Aditi Jobano, and Matt Weinberg. So the starting point is, as we all know, multi-party cryptographic protocols, multi-party protocols in general, make a lot of these honest majority or honesty of a quorum kind of assumptions. So for example, there's a lot of protocols that work when you have, say, 2 out of the 5 nodes are corrupt, but don't work, completely fail when 3 out of the 5 nodes are corrupt. And a kind of common goal that we have in mind is, hey, can we detect these protocol failures when they happen, and what can we do to fix them? So broadly, from an accountability perspective, we have these few intuitive goals in mind. So the first one is, let's say we want to identify when things go wrong. So that means whenever there's a failure of an assumption or a protocol property, we want to be able to detect this. And then if possible, we also want to be able to identify one of the culprits so that we can maybe penalize them in some fashion. So in this talk, my focus will be on scenarios that are sort of not publicly detectable, not publicly visible. So don't think about things like double signing, which you can just observe on chain and figure out that there's been a block height that's been signed twice. But instead, the setting we want to focus on today is where some party, if there's a collusion or if there's a failure in the protocol, some party will get a proof that they can then show to some external judge that will enforce like some penalization procedure. And we'll call these sort of protocols whistleblowing protocols. So essentially what the whistleblowing framework is let's say you have this multi-party protocol that's running. In its ideal form, it's emulating some functionality F, and the securities provided if at most some T-1 protocol nodes collude. So if T or more protocol nodes collude, then the protocol may completely fail. And the kind of idea with whistleblowing is that if there is a T-size collusion that happens, then you can essentially guarantee that one of these parties within the collusion will obtain a proof that's publicly verifiable so that they can show an external judge that, hey, something went wrong with the protocol and please enforce penalties. And for our purpose, you can think about this judge as an external smart contract as well. So you don't have to have any trusted state and you can sort of self-enforce this without any trusted party being involved. So when this collusion forms, there will be some party that has access to a proof that they can show this smart contract judge. So in general, we want to look at whistleblowing from 2 perspectives. The first is this cryptographic one, in the sense that when is it possible to generate these whistleblowing proofs of collusion? So for what cryptographic primitives can we guarantee that when there's a failure of the assumption, this threshold assumption, one of the parties will obtain this proof? And the second thing, which I'll focus on today, is the mechanism design or game theory side, is that even when we have such a cryptographic proof of collusion, are these colluding players actually incentivized to submit this proof to the judge, or are they just incentivized to stay silent? And in this context, we'll model a new form of collusion through essentially using smart contracts. We'll call this smart collusion. So today, because this is MEV Day, I'll only focus on the mechanism design side of things. And show sort of a general framework that can capture many existing works from the cryptographic whistleblowing proof of collusion as well. Okay, but just so that we're on the same page, these are some sort of natural properties that you want so that you build some intuition in your head. So sort of the cryptographic properties that we want are, let's say, some sort of completeness and soundness. So completeness says if this collusion has T parties, then someone will obtain a proof that they can show to a judge. Soundness means that if there's no collusion, then nobody can convince the judge that there is a collusion. And then unframability means that even if everyone except for one of these parties colludes, they still can't frame another honest party of being involved in a collusion. And this is especially important for proofs that can identify particular colluders. But from the game theoretic side, what we want is for these proofs to be incentive compatible. That means that whenever a proof is generated, you want to be incentivized to submit this proof. Or in other words, honesty must be sort of this sub-game perfect Nash equilibrium of the entire game. Of first whether deciding to collude or not, and then the second stage of deciding whether or not to submit this collusion proof. So I'll mention that this is sort of a broad framework that captures a lot of natural applications. So there's a bunch of new applications that we provide where you can think about a set of servers guaranteeing some service to the client and colluding with the client to provide some extra service that is sort of outside the protocol. So in the paper, we'll discuss things like distributed randomness beacons, where you want to ensure that this randomness is not leaked earlier, or things like rate-limited credentials or tokens, et cetera. And it also naturally applies to a lot of very recent existing work that looks at accountability in cryptographic primitives. So one really cool work is this secret sharing with snitching work, which essentially embeds this like MPC hard function in the reconstruction phase of secret sharing. So in typical secret sharing, if T parties collude, then this is sort of a silent failure and the protocol just breaks. But with secret sharing with snitching, if T parties collude, the only way that they can recover the secret is just sending all of the shares to just one party. So what this means is that that party will get a proof of collusion that they can show to an external judge. Another thing this sort of applies to is this new recent work on accountable threshold decryption, which applies to a lot of privacy-based MEV techniques. So in particular, in such a case, if these committee members come together to decrypt a ciphertext early, say in an encrypted mempool, then there will be a proof that they can show to a judge that they colluded to decrypt the ciphertext early. It also applies to other protocols like BFT forensics. And sort of our general idea is to establish this broad framework so that our game theoretic results in particular can apply to a large number of these accountable cryptography primitives. Okay, but as I said, I'll focus primarily on the game theory today. And we start with the idea that let's say you have this proof of collusion, right? You're a colluder who is equipped with this proof of collusion. The thing we want to look at from a game theory perspective is, should you submit this proof or is it better to stay silent? What are the incentives involved in that? So here's sort of the roadmap for the game theory. So I'll describe the first game, base game B, which is sort of the standard game of this cryptographic primitive. This is without any whistleblowing. So this is like, say, just standard secret sharing with silent failures. Then I'll describe this whistleblowing game, where now you design a cryptographic primitive with accountability so that someone gets a proof that they can show to a judge. And finally, I'll arrive at this new model of retaliation, which models our new smart collusion based approach that colluders can use, essentially where a collusion can be formed in a way that the colluders are penalized if they try to snitch on each other. Okay, so here's sort of the base game B without any sort of whistleblowing or accountability. Let's say each player I can play one of two things, either they're honest or they collude. And for simplicity, I'll only talk about n out of n collusion. So you need all n parties to collude in order to break the protocol, but the results for t out of n collusion are pretty similar as well. And let's say if all n people collude here in this example, each party gets some utility v. So the total utility of the collusion is n times v, and each party gets v. So now it's easy here to see that if there's no accountability procedure, obviously everyone's going to collude. That's a pure Nash equilibrium strategy that everyone just colludes. So now let's say a cryptographer comes along and designs a way for when this collusion happens, somebody obtains a proof of collusion. So this proof will be publicly verifiable so that you can be verified by a smart contract. We also allow it to be anonymous. So it doesn't need to reveal who submitted the proof. And that way we can just model this as a smart contract intuitively. So as I said, the game theory questions are how do we design this reward mechanism to actually incentivize people to submit this proof? So here's sort of the basic design for a protocol that works. So each each player you can think about as depositing some deposit D into this whistleblowing mechanism. And then the player decides whether they want to play honest or collude. So this is sort of the steps in the game inside the model. So first, the whistleblowing mechanism will ask for some deposit, and then each player can decide whether they want to play honest or collude. And if all of the players play collude, then this forms a collusion, and that results in this whistleblowing proof given to someone. And further, now when there's a collusion, the colluders can play either whistleblow or stay honest, so they can choose to either submit this proof or just stay silent and faithful to the collusion. And now, depending upon how many of these proofs were submitted to the mechanism can reward or penalize these colluding players. So basically, because we have anonymous whistleblowing, we need to allow for multiple parties to submit proofs as well. So you can think about these reward functions R and penalty functions S as sort of functions on the number of whistles that are submitted. And you can think about the deposit as sort of the maximum of all penalties that can be enforced to a player. So any maximum penalty that they can incur, that's how much deposit we'll take from them. And these are some natural properties that we'd want from a whistleblowing mechanism, is that when there's 0 whistles that have been blown, obviously you don't want to reward anyone, you don't want to slash anyone, because this is sort of the normal case. And we don't want to create any money, so any money that's awarded as rewards must come from penalizing some other player. And we also want to incentivize whistleblowing, so that means incentivize submission of this proof. So we want it so that the reward for submitting this whistle is larger than the penalty you'd get from losing out. Okay, so here's one mechanism that works. There's a bunch more that can, but here's just one example. So here's the high level idea is you just take deposit D is V plus epsilon from all of the players. So V again is the utility each player gets from the collusion. So you just take a deposit that's slightly larger than the individual utility that players get. And if there's no whistleblowing, so this is sort of the honest case, then take no action. If there's one whistle that was submitted, then you sort of reward the player V plus n minus 1 times epsilon, and then penalize everyone their whole deposit. And if there's more whistles, you actually just give 0 reward and just penalize everyone involved. And why does this work? Well, the intuition is you're sort of creating this prisoner's dilemma-esque situation for whistleblowing. So if I'm the only person that is whistleblowing, then I'm always better off, and I'd want to do that. But if more people whistleblow, then everyone's better off. Everyone's worse off. And so you're kind of creating this prisoner's dilemma and incentivizing people to whistleblow, but doing so will land them in a bad equilibrium. Okay, but now what can colluders do if they know about this whistleblowing mechanism? And the intuition here with smart collusion is using smart contracts to strengthen collusion in a way that penalizes defectors of the collusion. So basically what we're going to do is allow these colluders to use smart contracts as commitment devices. So what the contract will do is it will hold like a really, really large deposit from all of the colluders and then say something like, if anyone tries to rat us out, anyone tries to whistleblow, then we'll just burn everything to the ground, right? So this sort of intuitively will incentivize these colluders to stay faithful to the collusion. And the idea here is that the colluders can decide on this retaliation smart contract mechanism after the protocol designer's whistleblowing mechanism is announced. So they have this sort of first mover advantage. And we showed that smart collusion can actually circumvent a lot of prior results in accountable cryptography. And basically, it's impossible to protect against smart collusion. So I'll kind of just detail the game a little bit and sort of to state this impossibility result a little bit more formally, what we say is that smart colluders with enough money can always win. And the intuitive idea is that you just have a retaliation contract with a really large deposit. And what this means is that achieving unconditional security is feasible without smart collusion, but it's infeasible with smart collusion. And in fact, this impossibility result ends up holding true even when your whistleblowing protocol is anonymous, so that it doesn't leak who is doing the whistleblowing, and even when it can identify all colluders. So for example, in a T out of N collusion, even if it can identify all of the colluding players and then you only slash the colluding players, the impossibility result still holds. But we do have this bounded positive result, so all things are not lost. And the idea is we can protect against smart collusion, which takes in a much larger amount of money. So basically, we show that a small whistleblowing deposit, so let's say you take a deposit of D from each player in our original whistleblowing mechanism, this can protect against smart collusion with a much larger retaliation deposit of roughly n-1 times D. And sort of here's the intuitive sketch of a protocol for showing that this works, is basically what you do is you take deposit D from all of the players and then give the whistleblowing reward as n times D minus epsilon. So just the minus epsilon is so that all the colluders are not just incentivized to collude and then whistleblow. And basically, for smart collusion, to prevent this whistleblowing, each of them would need to put in a retaliation deposit that's larger than the reward that they would get from whistleblowing. So if I put in a deposit that's larger than n-1 times D minus epsilon, then I will prefer to stay silent because I'd lose a larger amount of money than I'd get from whistleblowing and claiming the reward from the mechanism. And we actually show a roughly matching lower bound. So this basically shows sort of a intuitive tight result for how much whistleblowing deposit we need to protect how much retaliation smart collusion deposit. Okay, another sort of positive result we have is in a sort of a long-standing server setting where clients are transient. So what this means is if there's a service that's offering some computational service, let's say to clients, and clients are coming and going, we show that smart collusion can only work to break our protocol if the service requires each client to lock up their deposit for indefinitely long. But as a client of the service, I'm not incentivized to collude with the servers if I have to lock up my money for indefinitely long, because that essentially is like a cost of service for me, which isn't accounted for. So basically, only in this specific setting, we can actually get unconditional security. As I mentioned before, the results roughly transfer to the T out of N collusion setting as well, basically by replacing all instances of N with just T. There's one subtlety of how we model this T out of N collusion. So in our model, we just assume that these T colluding parties somehow get together, and we start analyzing the model from this starting point. But the game does get complicated if we start to analyze this collusion formation phase, or if there's multiple collusions that players can sort of switch between. I'll just kind of talk about two example deployments before concluding, just to kind of give some intuition of where the results could be applied. So the first one you can think about is these custodial wallets. So think about something like Coinbase or Binance, which holds your funds for you in a way such that your key is not in the hands of the user. And this makes sense for some users who don't want to worry about storing a key themselves, so they can custody their key to an external service. And that external service can use something like secret sharing to distribute the key amongst multiple servers. But maybe the user still wants to be protected against collusion of these servers. So the user doesn't want to custody her funds herself, but still wants to be protected such that the committee that she's custodying her wallet to doesn't collude to just steal out her funds. So this is one kind of example where this whistleblowing framework can come into play. And we show that each committee member can deposit some 2W over N, where W is sort of the money in this user's wallet, in order to be protected against collusion. And the idea is like if there's a collusion proof that's submitted by the committee, the user will be reimbursed the amount of money in her wallet. So even if there's a collusion, she won't end up losing any money. And this is, of course, without smart collusion. Again, smart collusion, given enough money, can still break this. The other sort of interesting example deployment scenario is with distributed randomness beacons. So imagine sort of a committee that's running a VRF service for generating randomness that applications can use. So let's say we have this casino application that subscribes to this randomness feed and uses the randomness to run its casino games. Now the application still wants to be sure that nobody is colluding to learn this randomness early and then sort of stealing from the house. So basically what the casino can do is it can buy insurance from the committee. It can pay some premium to make the committee members lock up their deposits so that the casino is protected against any collusion that happens. And I'll mention that insurance pricing is sort of like an orthogonal point. You can think about it as based on some risk-free return of these extra funds that the committee members have to lock up. So you can think about some pricing algorithm for that. I'll just conclude with a brief summary. Basically, I talked about new smart contract-based collusion that circumvents a bunch of results in accountable cryptography. And I provided this sort of broad focused whistleblowing model for understanding the incentives in these accountable cryptography protocols. So with smart collusion, I showed that it's impossible to provide unconditional security, but on the positive side, you can protect against a much larger adversary with a lot more money by taking smaller deposits from everyone. And kind of the TLDR point of all this talk is even when we think about accountable cryptography, even cryptography more broadly, we should also think about the incentives. And all in there.
Thanks for the talk, Mahimna. And I really like the message of combining the incentives and the security side of things. One question, though, which on the part that you didn't mention so much today, but still maybe you can give some insight. So I'm curious, in generating this proof of collusion, this whistleblower proof, is it not possible to circumvent the generation of these kinds of proofs with like a dark DAO-like collusion where the committee colludes via TEE, where if you're decrypting some ciphertext, you're not revealing the plain text, but some function over the plain text? Can you protect against that somehow? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's sort of unclear and dependent upon the scenarios. So for example, this secret sharing with snitching work protects against MPC-based collusion, but it still finds it challenging to protect against TE-based collusion. So if, for example, everyone puts in their keys inside of a single TE and colludes that way, that's sort of already a centralizing component of the protocol. So it acts sort of as one entity with private state. And it seems more or less impossible to prevent against that kind of collusion as well. But you can prevent against MPC-based collusion. So the way this secret sharing with snitching work, for example, works is they embed this MPC hard function into the reconstruction part of the secret sharing. So the only way that you can reconstruct the secret is actually by just sending the shares to one specific party.
Okay, so the snitching works when you assume the adversary doesn't have access to a TE.
So it's not that the adversary doesn't have access to the TE, it's the case that all of the colluding nodes don't like dump their keys inside of the same TE.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we can take one more, and if the next speaker could go start setting up, please.
Yeah, my question was kind of related. Could you say one or two words about like, are you using additional tricks compared to what secret sharing with snitching does in terms of like how you do it cryptographically, preventing collusions?
So our work, I'll say, was more focused on the game theory side of understanding the incentives of all these protocols. So we provide some number of new settings, specifically in this sort of client-server model, where the servers are providing some computational service to the clients, and you want to prevent like off-band collusion. So think about this like randomness beacon setting, where you want to ensure that there's no collusion to recover the randomness early. And then we also show that our game theoretic framework also applies to existing accountable cryptography protocols, including this like secret sharing with snitching work, accountable threshold decryption work, among others. So there's no new cryptography work on that side, in our paper at least.